Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to episode number 176 of Let's Go Racing. Erik Jones, Dominic Aragon here with you as we look back at the weekend that was with a very interesting race with Denny Hamlin getting the win at Martinsville. Sammy Smith making a fool of himself in the Xfinity race. A lot of action this weekend at Martinsville. We'll talk about all of it. And we'll also look ahead to this weekend's action as well as the NASCAR Cup Series heads to Darlington. We'll be talking about throwback weekend and more coming up in just a little while from right now. Plus, we'll have our news and notes. We'll also get to our mailbag segment. And Brock Beard from Last Car is also here with us as well. We'll bring in Brock coming up in just a bit. So don't miss out on that. Dominic joins me right now. Dom, let's get started right off the top with the win for Denny Hamlin. 11 against the world. A little corny, I thought, but nonetheless, Denny Hamlin trying to embrace that the villain role of sorts and a dominating performance. We've seen the 20 car in that JGR camp do so well, but haven't seen any of the other cars really break out until now. And a track that he had raced so well at over the years, it had been 10 years since he had won there, gets back in victory lane. Big day for Denny Hamlin. And I would also add, too, they didn't have full sponsorship just a couple weeks ago. This was only his second, third race with Progressive and already takes them to victory lane. I imagine that's a big morale boost all around.
Seems like Denny's being a little passive progressive with his racing and their whole commercial and their marketing campaign. No, but seriously, what a great way for that investment to pay off right away with Progressive and their 18 race deal. And win number 55, the 11 for 11, Tyler tying Rusty Wallace on the NASCAR all-time wins list, which is very fascinating when you look at all the numbers behind that, because Rusty Wallace's final career victory came at Martinsville in 2004. Rusty was 47, Denny's 44. And somebody had pointed out to me earlier this week, I think I saw this on social media too, that Denny Hamlin now, in his most recent win, he is at an older age than compared to when Jeff Gordon won his final race, Jimmy Johnson, Jamie McMurray, a lot of these guys that raced into their 40s, Carl Edwards. So certainly some rare air here. Rare air here with Denny Hamlin being able to pull off the win at Martinsville. But Tyler, he's not running awful and just happened to luck into the win. They've been about a 6th to a 10th place team this year. He pulls off the win at Martinsville. I will admit the 11 against the world thing, I don't know if it's corny or if it just sounds like playing maybe a little victim here. I don't know. It just is a little weird to me on that 11 versus the world. I get why they're doing it, but I can't get behind that, but I can get behind Denny Hamlin having a fast start, and it looks like he's just getting started.
Yeah, big win for him. And, you know, even if it was a little corny, and I liked Denny playing the villain role. I enjoyed when he said I beat your favorite driver, all of them thing.
That's funny.
And
Yes.
that was great. But this one felt so forced. It was a bit much. I did see though, I don't know if it's 100% true. There was a backstory of a fan that claimed to give him the flag before the race, and then he brought out the flag after the win. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, then that's a little cooler, I guess.
Sure.
But
I could go. Yeah.
Denny, now, Dom, we've seen JGR has speed. Denny gets back in victory lane. We know that he can win anywhere except maybe a road course, pretty much. I would have to think that Denny is back to being a championship threat. It's been a while since he'd been in victory lane, too.
And it had been about 30 races. Dover last year was his last victory, and he won 3 races. And if you include the Clash and the opener, they're 4 out of the first 11 or 12 events, and then just radio silence, a few top 5 finishes here and there. But most of the laps led and accumulated were in the first half of the year last year. So Denny Hamlin seems to be back. But that 11 flag, keep coming back to it, Tyler. Am I overreaching here? Am I out of bounds in saying it seemed like a little bit of like, poor me, I'm the victim kind of thing? I don't get the messaging on it. I get a lot of Hamlin's antics. This one just seemed a little weird.
Yeah, it just seemed forced, is
Yeah,
what I thought. And they're already selling merchandise and all that. I can't blame them for trying to get something out of it,
they're
but
capitalizing. It was a marketing thing. That was the entire goal of this thing then.
yes, exactly. Meanwhile, I do want to touch on the Xfinity controversy real quick before we bring in Brock. Austin Hill gets the win, was in fifth place on that last lap, and then just came out of nowhere with what happened there with Sammy Smith. And Sammy Smith, I mean, just an awful situation and just really made a fool of himself there with the way things played out. And that kind of overshadowed a lot of the weekend. Mike Joy on the Cup broadcast was talking about the Xfinity Series, saying that it's a dumpster fire. Well, wait, actually, it's not a dumpster fire because the dumpster fire is contained. But he was not wrong about what he said at all. And I think people were looking at that saying, man, what are we doing here? Like there's some crazy stuff going on every week in this series. The Xfinity Series, I think, is actually a decent product, but there is a lack of maturity in that series too, and I think that showed with what Sammy Smith did there.
And we'll talk more about that in our news and notes with the points penalty, breaking not only that down and a lot of the other penalties that NASCAR announced on Tuesday with all of it, but certainly NASCAR putting the hammer down, saying, no, we're not going to tolerate this. And we kind of expected that with the penalty report. And NASCAR came down hard on Austin Dillon for doing the same thing at Richmond a few months back. So there's no question NASCAR was going to make a statement with it. But something's got to give. When you have a lot of your competitors and a lot of former respected competitors talking about this and they won't stop talking about it, something is going to need to give. And I feel like NASCAR maybe took that step in the right direction on Tuesday with that. But again, we'll get to that in news and notes.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that coming up later on in the show. Dominic Brock Beard joining us. I believe this is his third appearance on LGR. Tell us more about Brock here.
Well, who better than all of these penalties and the disqualification of Erik Jones? Who better to break all that down than Brock Beard? And by the way, to not just his lastcar.info NASCAR news website, but of course his racing insights and his big social media presence and his YouTube presence. Couldn't think of anybody else better to bring on this week and as a recurring guest here on Let's Go Racing. Brock, we appreciate you taking the time to join us this week.
Absolutely. Thank you both for having me on.
So it's a tale of two stories here. When you look at the win there with Denny Hamlin and taking win number 55, and then Erik Jones, believe in your article, you talk about this is the first time in, I believe, 5 years Erik Jones has finished last in a Cup Series race. So quite the story there. I'd love to hear a little bit inside baseball from you here because I know you cover that back half of the field really extensively and very thoroughly. So how much were you scrambling when the news broke about 90 minutes after the checkered flag that, hey, the 43 car, they finished last. They did not meet minimum weight.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the challenges of covering the last place battle. I always count disqualifications in there as to the statistics, and so when I do my own show after the race, there a lot of times there may be some late breaking news during the show, and actually saying like, "Oh, but hang on, something's changed there." Hasn't happened too often while I've been on stream there, but this is definitely a case of that. Fortunately, I didn't actually have much of the race article written, actually, in this case here. Usually, if somebody drops out early, I get a head start on working on it and so forth, and then I can kind of polish it after the race is over with. But in this case, it actually took the entire race distance, just about the entire distance, to even get to that point. Indeed, the biggest part of the battle for most of the race, Josh Berry was back there briefly after his electrical issue, but the battle between Burt Myers and Casey Mears took almost the entire distance. And they were about 4 or 5 laps apart in the last like 50 laps. Then Casey Mears comes down for a long pit stop, and Carl Long gets on the radio and says, "We're on the same lap as the last place driver there." And they were, in fact, on the track when they were showing the leaders come through them there, they were only about 1 corner apart. So we could have conceivably had the rarest of the rare, perhaps the last place battle coming down to the finish. About the only time I've seen that was at the Texas All-Star race in 2021 when I was covering it there. Had a side-by-side battle for last place. And then Denny Hamlin came down pit road by himself to get some lug nuts tightened to avoid what would have been a costly penalty there. And he ended up being the feature of the article. So sometimes it's very, very rare and once in a blue moon, you could have that situation there. And then on top of all this, thrown into the middle of all of that was Austin Cindric, who with about 25 laps to go, just when Mike Joy was bringing up the fact that we could potentially have the first Martinsville race with everybody finishing under power, two car goes behind the wall there, gets pushed to the garage area, ran out of batteries from all the electrical issues that he was having, similar to Josh Berry. I assume they had just the same nucleus of batteries available from the 21 team, and looked like he was going to be the story. Had something started on that. And then, as I said, had the news about Erik Jones. And in fact, last time Erik Jones finished last in a Cup race, was at the Charlotte Roval. He was eliminated from contention back when he was driving for Joe Gibbs and had been disqualified from, I believe, the previous race at Richmond in that race as well. So, it was something just really kind of sabotaged his playoff run that year. But this time around, so many years later, so many changes later with Legacy Motor Club, unfortunately didn't meet minimum weights. And as you said, disqualification was the result.
And the other thing too, when NASCAR announced that they were going to take the 43 car and the 10 car back for research and development and further inspection and teardown in Concord, North Carolina, usually that's not a good sign if they're bringing back random cars. And sometimes nothing comes of it. But of course, the penalty report didn't have anything further on it. But you got to wonder too, if you're a competitor, if you're looking at these situations, how do you take a respectable top 20 day like Erik Jones had, 21st or 24th, wherever he was, to finish last. And not only on top of that, we're adding salt to that wound. We're going to take your car back, and are we going to hand out an L2 penalty or an L1 penalty and face even severe consequences? So that's got to be nerve-wracking for the teams as well.
Oh, extremely. I think especially in light of what we saw with Alex Bowman last year when he had his disqualification that had massive championship implications for him in the 48 team. And there was a lot of speculation over that hit that he had in the front stretch chicane there and the possibility of weight coming out of the car. I don't recall if that was ever really confirmed or anything, but it was interesting how much the team, much like we hear with Legacy Motor Club this week, is not really contesting the penalty. It's like, yeah, we weren't even close to being like the right weight, and they're just kind of accepting it there. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's the same situation, if it's an issue of lost weight or anything, or if it just they were just trying something much like the 48 team did and just got caught. I suppose that'll be revealed whenever we do hear more about that.
And Tyler, we know NASCAR is very transparent. They've been very transparent, in fact, when there's been penalties like the Hamlin and Busch thing, and bringing and inviting the media to the NASCAR hauler. Hey, look, here's on display what they did. I'm thinking the same thing's going to happen this upcoming week in Darlington.
Yeah, I would think so, to give perspective on that and to tell exactly what's going on. I would think that Brock, where it probably gets interesting for you on your front is with keeping track of all this. If the 43 team appeals, and if they win the appeal, then trying to go back and correct the numbers and all that. I mean, this is an ongoing thing here, I would think.
Oh, it's a very good point, and actually it's good you mentioned that, Tyler, because, we actually had a very similar situation in the Xfinity series. I believe it wasn't last year. It must have been the year before where, actually Darlington, where we're coming up here, had Noah Gragson, I believe he had a technical infraction and then they overruled it. And Matt Mills was the last place finisher. And I believe that was one where I actually had to rewrite the article because he was successful on the appeal and it went back to Mills again, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I mean, such a thing could happen. Usually I actually have a folder on my computer when I have written an article a bit further along and there's stuff I got to take out. I try not to just delete that information. I just kind of save it in another folder. It's like, okay, next time this person's gonna be last, I could end up using this much later. And indeed, perfect example of it this year. Finally had the first last place finish for the number 2 in the truck series earlier this year with Keith McGee and Stephen Malozzi driving the truck there. First time when we were in Texas that same weekend as the All-Star race there. Sheldon Creed was in last place, and then that got beaten by Ross Chastain with a disqualification there and kind of saved that statistic, and it came up later on. So that's a wonderful thing with last place. It could be anybody. You could hear about it in some tracks. Maybe most of the field could win a race, as a super speedway, a very small portion of them at most other tracks, but in last place, it's wide open.
So tell me this, Brock, I'm sure you got the numbers here. What are the last place statistics looking like through this point in the season?
Well, let me pull that up. I haven't quite memorized that yet. But let me get that. I will get that information for you here on the Cup Series side with Erik Jones getting the last place by disqualification. We still do not have a repeat last place finisher on the Cup Series side, but Cody Ware is leading on the bottom 5 tiebreaker of 3-2 over Carson Hocevar, Riley Herbst, and Brad Keselowski.
Shocked,
on that
I tell you. Shocked.
Yep. So there's that part of the story. Cody Ware's had, I mean, it's been a difficult stretch run for the Rick Ware Racing team. Obviously, things have been kind of back and forth. A lot of the chaos that happened last year when they had Justin Haley step out and then Corey LaJoy. And, I almost think like them going back and focusing more on one car, maybe it'll help in the longer run there. But again, it's definitely not been a runaway, even though Cody Ware's leading the Cup Series standing there. It's not by a large margin, so we'll see how that definitely develops. Xfinity Series, very similar. Anthony Alfredo was our last place finisher in the Martinsville race this past week and took the lead. I believe Dean Thompson was leading it coming in. He only actually has a tie with Christian Eckes to the bottom 10 record there. One last place finish, two bottom fives, three bottom tens. Dean Thompson now behind them in the third spot overall. Again, no repeats in that series, but the Truck Series is a very different story on that end there. That's where Steve Malazzi got two consecutive last place finishes, almost, it was three in a row for the number 2 team there at the the Room Brothers Racing effort there, but very nearly had that streak continued there. Cody Dennison driving the truck this past week, but Ryan Roulette got his first in his Truck Series debut. Malazzi still leads the standings as the only repeat last place finisher there. Keith McGee, Parker Kligerman, and Ryan Roulette, the only other last place finishers, and that's the top 3 series at the moment.
So I got to bring this up. I don't know if he has a last place finish yet this year or not, but for me, I think if we're talking back at the field, the biggest story has got to be Ty Gibbs and just how horrendous he has been this in great equipment. It's his third season. There's no excuses for it. And he just broke the record held by J.J. Yaley of most races ever at JGR without a win. And might I add, J.J. Yaley did not have a good run at JGR at all by any stretch of the imagination. So that's not company you want to be in. Brock, give me your thoughts. What's going on with Ty Gibbs? I'm sure you've been paying attention closely here. It has just not been his year, and really last year he had his struggles too. He's kind of, he ended the year on a bad note last year, and he's kind of picked up from where he left off from last year, but not in a good way.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the statistic there about Ty Gibbs and the deal with J.J. Yaley and not getting a win there. It's been very surprising to me as well. I have to say, I think with his debut, driving in place of Kurt Busch after that terrible wreck at Pocono and having a decent run, I remember him starting in last place, kind of covering that and seeing how far he could get through the field. This was a driver, especially given his dominance in the Xfinity Series around that same time. I thought he was really going to take off and at least score a couple of victories especially once he got his own ride there. Maybe not that first year. He actually had a lot of last place contention that time, driving for 23:11. But then getting over to the Gibbs team, it's like, oh man, okay, here's where it starts taking off. But as you said, I mean, it's really not been the story. And he did have that last place run at Phoenix last year. They've been showing every week on the Fox broadcast there, tracking just these consistently poor finishes, outside the top 20 on a weekly basis. I have to wonder a number of things that are going on. And this is where, I don't want to speculate too much here, but I mean, there is some stuff that's public information that I think maybe could be a factor. Of course, the state of Joe Gibbs Racing itself and the tragedy of these last few years, losing JD Gibbs, losing Coy Gibbs, and what's been going on behind the scenes there. I'm not sure what the story is there, especially given, as you mentioned, seeing now Denny Hamlin winning at Martinsville and the team itself still putting together winning rides. You got that issue there. But for him, maybe it's a very different circumstance. And then on the same time, and I'm trying to remember, I know there was some story about this last year. Isn't Ty Gibbs also taking on like an ownership role in the Xfinity Series of that 54 team that Taylor Gray is? So that, that could very well be a distraction as well. I think that, sports psychology, is a thing for very good reason. You can have people that get pulled in a lot of different directions. You already have the demands of being, that already. And now you have this on top of it about, what's the future of Joe Gibbs Racing? They have a lot of success. Christopher Bell rattling off all those wins this year, and they got some very good prospects here in the pipeline with Toyota. But maybe that's becoming a distraction, and maybe that's an issue there. And if it is, I hope it's something that is able to get worked out, and they can figure something out there. But it doesn't seem to be the equipment, and it doesn't seem to be the support from the team. And he's definitely got, he's got the Monster Energy sponsorship pretty much every week. And, it's, yeah, I'm curious if it just feels to me like there's probably something that, maybe behind the scenes that we're not seeing or only seeing glimpses of that maybe is a factor there.
Well, Brock, I'm of the belief that based on what we're seeing with the lack of results from Ty Gibbs in that 54 car, if his last name wasn't Gibbs, we would already be talking about replacements of who would be sitting in that ride next year. And I would imagine even for Joe, this has got to be difficult right now to justify Ty Gibbs being in that car. I would think that he's back next year, but whether it's from or some of their partners, the pressure's got to start mounting at some point if they don't get something together here soon.
It's a very good point, and it's a harsh reality in this sport, and that string of races. I mean, a couple of seasons, like, there used to be a time where, you're a rookie and you're not expected to do well. And, now things have really so much changed with the Tony Stewarts and Jeff Gordons and everybody else that's been involved in the sport. And now you got these really young drivers and they're developing through the ranks, and you got prospects that are in the pipeline. And yeah, if you don't perform and you don't stake your claim, I mean, Erik Jones, I mean, just talking about him a moment ago, I mean, him losing that ride in the 20 car. I mean, even after winning the Southern 500 and ultimately winning it a second time, he finds himself in a completely different situation. But you're right. Yeah. I mean, with Ty Gibbs, I mean, if it weren't for that family connection, I mean, there would very likely be a different, result there. But, I don't know what the solution is, but there's clearly some kind of problem there. I don't know if it's what with the car. I just can't help but think, and again, not to make too much of it, but I mean, it really can't be overlooked is, he think about the end of that Xfinity Series championship. He storms through all those wins, knocks Brandon Jones out of the way, and he's just brash and he's going through all this, and he wins, and he has a pretty calm race at Phoenix and won that convincingly, took the championship to the point you got the other three people in the championship four that are just kind of like they don't really have much to say really in the media center afterwards. And then just this tragedy happens. And, I mean, and we're still getting the grasp of it because, of course, very private matter, and we're not really hearing the whole story, from that. And I'm sure he'll share that if ever when he's comfortable doing so. But then, yeah, he gets into the Cup Series, different car, rookie season, and again, I think there were some moments in his first season that were, that were intriguing there. But yeah, it's still been kind of off there, and I can't help but think that would be some kind of a factor there.
And I think the crew chief
Tom,
too, Tyler, you have Tyler Allen, who just moved up from Xfinity and on paper looks great. 8 victories in that Xfinity program. We even ran some races with Ty, and he filled in with Christopher Bell years ago. I remember even here at Las Vegas too, that there were some issues on the radio and just like, please tighten my car up or loosen my. It was one way or the other. Please throw something at this vehicle. I can't do anything with it. It seemed like they were still trying to gel together on the radio as well. Granted, they're only 7 races into this partnership, but the crew chief certainly has to have an aspect on that as well.
yeah, I would think that's a big part of it. And Dom, you and I talked about a couple of weeks ago that the way that he dominated in the Xfinity series, like if you're looking for solutions, some people, I think back to Cole Custer, for example, who was obviously tied in family wise with that Haas team. And some of the solutions, that people throw out there is, well, maybe he just needs to go to the Xfinity series and get his confidence back up, whatever. But he dominated so much in the Xfinity series, won his first ever start. I don't think him going back to the Xfinity series, Brock, would do him any good. If his future, what his goal he's trying to figure out is this Cup car in this Cup situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think and that's the quick success he had in that series, as you mentioned, and just being that good out of the box. And we've seen him make occasional Xfinity starts and still be right up there, and you see that, yeah. But I mean, there's no higher to go. There's nowhere higher to go, and I think. I mean, is this going to be a situation like where, I'm trying to think of other drivers that have been in somewhat similar situations. John Wood, for example, of course, now taking on a big role over the Wood brothers. Is it going to be something where, I mean, it's just it's difficult to make these comparisons because he's just so young. And I know he's had a few seasons here, so we seem to have enough sampling data here to really show his track in the Cup Series. But is it too soon to even have that conversation about if it should be looking into assuming more of an ownership role? Is this deal with the Xfinity team maybe kind of a beginning of that transition or anything? And what's going on there? I mean, it's we've seen veteran drivers struggle with this car as well. And we've seen other drivers surprisingly take off and really get used to this car. And maybe there's still some unpredictabilities there, but I agree. Going back to your point though, I mean, him going back to the Xfinity series, you know, uh, I don't see that helping his prospects in the Cup Series, but I think, and maybe kind of anticipating our discussion of about the Xfinity race here in a little bit, there used to be such a thing as somebody that was just kind of in the Xfinity series and they just kind of stayed there. We used to have drivers that made big careers in the Xfinity series. In fact, drivers like Randy LaJoie preferred it, so because it wasn't as much of a time commitment as the Cup
Justin
Series.
Allgaier, yeah.
Justin Allgaier,
Jason
yeah.
Keller,
Again,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Jason Keller, exactly. Drivers that, in all those cases, even Jason Keller was the relief driver for Jerry Nadeau after his accident in Richmond. He had very limited experience, if I remember correctly. I know it was something like that he had some limited experience in Cup. But again, they just stayed in the Xfinity series, and they were kind of the ones that, were in there. And I don't know if that's an option for Joe Gibbs Racing, but I think that their hand may be guided if they got somebody in the pipeline, whether it's Taylor Gray or somebody else coming up here that just starts taking off, and they got to compare the numbers and they got to give the other guy a shot. And that may end up forcing their hand.
Yeah, maybe so. Dom, anything else for Brock before we go to news and notes here?
I think I would just add on this whole situation, Brock. I'd be curious your take on it. We've seen how cutthroat Joe Gibbs can be. We know he's a great coach, Super Bowl winning coach, business savvy, the entrepreneurial type. He does not have patience like you would see at a Rick Hendrick organization or Aspire Motorsports. We saw what happened with Matt Kenseth. We saw what happened with Kyle Busch. Now, granted, your grandson. I get that. That changes a lot of things here. I can only think the patience, that much more patience that he's going to have for Ty Gibbs is starting to wear a little thin. We know how he is as a coach, Brock. I can't see Coach Gibbs letting Ty run 25th every week and continuing to do that.
I agree. It's a very good point. I mean, it's the long-standing ramifications of this are probably something we're really going to feel throughout this year, especially if the performance doesn't turn around. And I know that in the current playoff format, we have such a format where the underlining thing is just, can you win a race? Can you win a race and get yourself into the playoffs? And then can you win in those situations to be able to advance to the next round? But you got to win your first race to even be in that conversation. I mean, you got people with a point in, but then, you got to have much better finishes than what Gibbs is currently doing right here at the moment. So it's a difficult situation, on both fronts there. But, as to, you mentioned, the business savvy of Joe Gibbs, and it's very difficult decisions. I'd forgotten about, the Matt Kenseth deal too. Seemed like everything was, kind of going that same direction. And then you got a driver with his experience. And then, it's just, there's either just not enough seats or you got enough, prospects coming in there that they got to make room for somebody else. And, it's, I think, we may well be reaching that point. And, yeah.
And I would also add to that point too. Joe Gibbs Racing does not have a good track record when it comes to developing talent. You look at the four drivers that they have in that Cup field right now, and Denny is the only one that came up through their system. They screwed up with Joey Logano. I think that's their most famous screw up. You look at a number of guys there. I mean, they've made mistakes after mistakes. Erik Jones, I thought they gave up on too quickly too. Well, Christopher Bell, I guess, came in through their system. I forgot about Christopher Bell. But, I mean, a lot of misses and a lot of impatience. And even Christopher Bell's case, he had to go, race a year for Levine before he was in a Gibbs car. He didn't go all the way through the Gibbs pipeline either. So, very fascinating stuff there. Let's get to our news and notes, our top headlines across the sport. Dom, where do you want to start this week?
We start with the penalty report. NASCAR announcing on Tuesday a multitude of penalties across all three series when it came to the racing action at Martinsville. Let's start with the truck series. Of course, you have lug nut penalties across where if you have a loose lug nut, NASCAR is going to fine you a certain amount of money. They did that with Rajah Caruth's number 71 team with a $2,500 fine. You move to the Cup Series, SVG having two crew members suspended after his right rear tire fell off during stage 3 of the race. But perhaps some of the most compelling penalties out of that penalty report, Tyler and Brock. Sammy Smith being fined $25,000 and 50 driver's points for his actions on the last lap there with the Martinsville race on Saturday. That dropped him from being sixth in points comfortably, almost a one race advantage over the playoff cut line to just outside the cut line. Interestingly enough, 1 point behind Taylor Gray, who holds the final spot, as well as monetary fines for Jeb Burton and Taylor Gray for infield care center conduct, is what NASCAR called it. So certainly a slew of penalties this week, and Sammy Smith feeling the brunt of that.
Yeah, not great. Front, Brock, your thoughts?
I mean, I was chewing this over this afternoon as well, and I think there seems to be, I mean, there's a lot of people up in arms over what happened in that race, and understandably, from how wild it was, and I think part of the frustration is the lack of a decision in the moment. And I understand that. I think that, if they had penalties, if they stopped, like, I mean, it wasn't just, Sammy Smith, it was also Austin Hill, it was also Sam Mayer. And those are just the ones we saw on TV that were running over people pretty consistently. Unfortunately, of course, Sammy Smith being the most egregious, being on the last lap and clearly dumping Taylor Gray out of the win there. I think if they had penalties where they held people, 3 laps, 5 laps, or whatever, just had them cool down and, made that clear from the outcome. I think that could have set the tone, and maybe we wouldn't have had the race end the way it did there too. I feel with this penalty that NASCAR is trying to do it in such a way that, like, just turn back the clock. It's like, well, if we had done that, it would have been this, like, maybe treat it almost like a disqualification, where, yeah, I mean, you cost like what, a whole race worth of points, as you're describing there, that it would drop you back, or almost treat it. I saw somebody else mentioning on social media, describing it almost like a suspension without having the effect of that suspension, because of course they had the rule change this year about how that affects the playoff standings. I guess under the circumstances, this is probably the best they could have done here. But I hope that their plan going forward is to be more proactive about it, in the moment with it, and actually use the penalty box. I mean, which has been used in the past. Even just last year, there was statistics just put up earlier, that was showing how that's come up there. I believe Seth Eggert was showing that on social media. So yeah, something like that just needs to come up. But again, I'm glad they did something, and I guess in this sense, that was probably for the best.
Yeah, I mean, Dom, realistically speaking, you know, with that penalty situation for that group, I mean, you knew it was coming. It was just a matter how much it was going to be. Like that pretty much worked out as well as it could have.
Certainly, and you look at who the team owner is, Dale Earnhardt Jr., and he's been a big advocate for the sport, and he's not afraid to speak his mind. Would not be surprised if he sends an internal message here too, and he's not going to park Sammy, of course, but he's going to probably make him pay the fine, if I had to guess. And you hear a lot of times the team owners will take care of paying the fines for drivers, but maybe he sits down with Sammy and says, "Hey, this one's on you, and you're going to be the one that has to eat that."
Yeah, maybe so, or some type of other internal punishment of sorts. I mean, I would say this, Brock, to add to that as well. Like Dale Jr. has so much respect for the sport, and the way that he sees this sport in the vision that he wants. Um, that's what I like in a team owner where he's not going to be okay with this. You would have other owners, I'm not going to name names, but you guys know who they are, that will defend their driver to the 100th degree and will try to find every excuse possible. But I feel like we can confidently say that Dale Jr. is going to keep his guys accountable for screw ups like this.
No, very good point. And and that's I'm so glad this is coming up, because this is another aspect of it that does need to be hammered home. And who better than Junior to lead the way on it there? Where is the team owner's responsibility in all this? All we heard this whole weekend, I mean, I couldn't help but in my own show kind of discussing just like it's like, wow, I mean, everybody's acting like these drivers don't know how to drive and they're just too aggressive and they're too crazy. It's like, well, where's the team owner's role in this? They're the ones signing the checks, they're the ones hiring these drivers, they're the ones debriefing with them each week. I mean, do they just have something like this happen and then just say, good job on the, good job on Monday. Too bad you didn't wreck this guy. And then just move on to the next week. Well, I mean, there's, I'm sure I'm painting this in broad strokes, but I mean, that's, they do play a role in this. I've seen some people on social media kind of scoff at this and say like, oh, well, it's not their job to hand out penalties. It's like, no, but like, as you were saying, Tyler, I mean, they really do work with these drivers. And if it's a situation where, yeah, they force them to pay the penalty, or, if not, fixing the car up or whatever the situation may be, yeah, that's their right to do that. That's their own business. And that should play a role. And it wasn't too uncommon. We don't usually see drivers swapped out of rides these days. I mean, it was very unusual last year with the whole Corey LaJoy, Justin Haley thing. It seems like, a generation ago that was a lot more common, and it would sometimes happen over a situation like this. A driver, one bad race or one bad decision or something like that. And sometimes that gets handled and it's the team that drives that. So maybe this will be something that leads the way that way.
Maybe so. Dom, what else we got?
Well, we know we've been talking a lot about the NASCAR lawsuit in 2311, but now we have two teams suing each other. So, according to reporting from the racingexperts.com, Jonathan Field and The Athletic with Jordan Bianchi, Legacy Motor Club is suing Rick Ware Racing, alleging that Rick Ware Racing has backed out of a charter purchase agreement that they had signed last month. So that would have been in March. So the lawsuit, which goes into details, a 46-page filing in the state of North Carolina, Legacy is alleging that Rick Ware Racing agreed to a deal on January 6th and then on March 3rd backed out to a binding charter purchase agreement. Where the confusion is coming, Rick Ware Racing is accused of backing out of, is saying that they thought it was going to be 2027 and not 2026. So this breaks Tuesday, April 1st, and this is all still very fresh and playing out. But now you have two teams in a legal turmoil against each other, and Legacy is seeking a prohibitionary injunction. They're looking to really send a message on this. They're saying this could be detrimental to their business. At least that's what they claim, if this does not go through.
So I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't think any of us do necessarily. But if I were to guess, just based on track record and organizational structure, I have one organization that I feel real obvious is the one to believe here in this case, in Legacy Motor Club. I would tend to think that they are probably the ones that are right on this, the ones that were making the purchase. And the confusion of 2026 versus 2027, I also tend to lean towards Legacy Motor Club being right on this for another reason of these charters, almost all these sales are year to year. I can't recall. Maybe I'm wrong on this. I very well could be. I can't think of any charter purchases 2 years out in advance that have occurred since we've done this charter system. So, I mean, if I have to give the benefit out one way or other, I lean towards Legacy Motor Club of them probably being the ones that have a case here, and they're the ones making the purchase. They're the ones that are putting their money here. That's the way I lean towards in this, but obviously we got to let the details play out. But it's a very bizarre situation.
It is, and it's still fresh, Brock. And I look at the two teams as the facts, and I guess where my mind goes, these aren't powerhouse organizations necessarily, but again, where my mind goes here, Brock, is all the men and women that work at these teams, all the people behind the scenes that this could potentially affect. Because if you have Legacy that's trying to purchase a third charter from Rick Ware Racing, what's that saying about maybe the long-term deal there? And I know they had two charters at one time. They've leased out over the years. That's been a whole situation. Legacy seems like they're trying to grow and expand with a third full-time car. Now it seems like, again, surface level here in the first days that this has come out, that what's going to happen, I guess, short-term and long-term. That's where my mind's going. What about you, Brock?
Sure. I mean, that's definitely a worthy concern because, I mean, the the charter system is, I mean, I'm not going to go fully into my thoughts on that aspect of it there, but to sum it up, I've always found it to be a very brutal system. Whereas, we've had teams shut down in the past, and other teams spring forward from them. Nowadays in the Cup Series, because of the finite number of them, it's like required to happen. So whenever a charter is leased or especially sold, I mean, yeah, it has massive implications for certainly the team that's losing the charter there, and in some cases the team just shuts down. And so yeah, each one of these transactions I think does bear some scrutiny, and I think what's going to be very interesting in this case is going to be the discovery aspect of it here, much like what we're seeing with the 2311 lawsuit. You know, I've always kind of viewed, at least from an outsider, and maybe this just speaks to my own ignorance here. It just seems like it's kind of the Wild West with these buying and selling in charters. Who's overseeing this? Is there like an actual marketplace and so forth? I mean, sure, I know NASCAR has, in the RTA and whoever is involved in it, they're, tracking it one way or the other. But I mean, I look at like that chart that Bob Pockris posts every year, and you see this lease here and this sale here and moving it around. It's so hard to keep straight. I'm glad he has. So, I mean, that's showing that, there's some paper trail here with all this. But again, I think the discovery aspect is going to be really interesting because, we're getting glimpses of it, the 2311 deal there, more from the, pushing forward those sales in spite of the lawsuit. That was kind of the separate issue there. But in this one here, the actual marketplace and learning more about that, I hope that that's going to be some opportunity from this one here because it just seems like, again, these prices just go up and up, and it just becomes astronomical here. And then yeah, I mean, maybe you have another case where maybe is a little bit of strategy playing into this. Maybe, did is it becoming like a kind of a stock market kind of situation here with this?
Well,
I think that'll be the thing to be curious about.
one thing I think about, this is not uncommon in the sports world. I know it's new to NASCAR, but one example, the Minnesota Timberwolves in the NBA, they were selling to Alex Rodriguez, the former baseball player, and he agreed in principle to a deal, and they had to make a payment by a certain deadline. And basically, by the time that deadline came, the Timberwolves all of a sudden started winning more games than they had in a long time. And the owner tried to pull a backhanded thing, the rug out underneath them, and not allowing the sale to go through. That way he could own the team and sell it for even more money was his eventual goal. Eventually it got settled. It went to court. And the other thing that was interesting about that was A-Rod was actually already a minority owner of that team as is. So you had a lawsuit going on between owners that own the same thing. And then it got worked out in court, and A-Rod and his group were eventually let to buy that team. But I also think about the timing of all this, Dom, as well, which is a very important aspect here. When you look at the lawsuit, Rick Ware Racing is claiming that it was for 2027. Legacy's claiming it's 2026. And when you get the legal process involved, I think the 2311 Front Row Motorsports lawsuit is a good example of this. It drags on. These things don't get taken care of quickly unless there's a settlement of some sorts. And so, if you're Legacy Motor Club here, if your goal was to get a third charter by 2026, that can't be looking good as of March right now because we don't know if any charters are going to open for next season beyond this one here. And on top of that, too, just the legal process playing itself out, this could take a long time. Could be well after the start of the 2026 season before we have a resolution here.
Sometimes, as you would know, Brock, a lot of this court stuff can move very, very slow and very painstaking process too. And just another weird element to add to it. You mentioned that chart, and while you were talking about that, I found the jski.com chart that goes back to 2016, and it tracks where every team and every charter has been. And maybe you guys had already known. I had forgotten. I knew Rick Ware Racing had downsized with one charter this year, but that they were leasing out the charter to the 60 team with RFK Racing. So that Priest charter is a borrowed time type deal right now. My understanding with those two is that charters can only be leased out by that organization once every X amount of years. Maybe it's every 5 years. So they're going to get their second charter back. Is it that charter that Legacy was looking at, or the 51? So all of these details will probably come to light, and all of the information is going to start stacking in. But now you're implicating other areas. There's more variables, I think, than we might realize right now.
Maybe you guys know this. I don't. Um, do we know of, or do we have any suspicions of any other charters that will be up for sale for next year?
Brock, I don't. You?
I'm not sure. I haven't really measured that so much. I mean,
Oh, see,
yeah,
that's another element here. Like Legacy, this might be their only shot potentially to
And
get.
that's why they could be pushing so hard for it too. And then the even bigger
true.
picture, you have the 2311 in NASCAR lawsuit. And correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but through some of that paperwork that NASCAR said, they could revoke the charter system if they really wanted to. So is it all null and void at the end of it?
Yeah, it's very good that you bring that up, Dominic. I mean, and I know some people were saying that that was like a bluff or something. I think they're dead serious about that. I think that could, I mean, that's the way it had been all the way before 2016. It's no skin off NASCAR's nose. So, yeah, maybe that's a factor in this case too.
Yeah, a lot to play out. We'll see what happens there. Dama, what else we got?
We look ahead to NASCAR this weekend at Darlington Raceway. Now, the Truck Series is off. So we had three triple head race weekends entering Darlington. Now we have the Cup and Xfinity Series taking action in South Carolina. Before we get to any of the stuff, David Starr, not here this week, but we chatted with him before the show. He is going to be racing or attempting to make the race this weekend with Joey Gase and the 53 team. And as we get ready for the show next week, he will be back to kind of break down how his race weekend went. But David will be making his first attempt in the NASCAR Xfinity Series this year in the Char car, that number 53, with sponsorship from the Motor Coach Store and Kale's Furniture Maintenance, as well as the Jason Beck Memorial Fund. So he's got a few partners lined up with that, as well as T&L Maintenance out of Texas, out of Chapel Hill. So David will be returning to the Xfinity Series. Will be interesting to see how he does this week, and we'll be rooting him on, of course, with the podcast. But as we get to the rest of the headlines this weekend, Tyler and Brock, you had to guess. We love to look at the opening odds for the NASCAR race week before any lap has been turned on the racetrack. Who do you guys think the odds-on favorite for the Goodyear 400 is, and what are their opening odds? We'll start with you, Brock.
Ooh. I'm just starting to kind of think about who to pick on that. I'll just go with the first thing that came to my mind. Last summer, we saw that daring battle there between Kyle Busch and Chase Briscoe at the end of that race there, and Kyle came very close, probably almost, maybe debatably the closest he had come to pulling off a win last year. Of course, the Harrison Burton at Daytona thing was probably even closer than that. But this is a track that certainly it favors the veterans. You see guys like Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson, run well here, and then Kyle Busch, of course. Now, I mean, it's so hard for me to think of him as being kind of that salty old veteran out there from back in 2005, 2004. But yeah, maybe this may well be a time that things turn around. We've seen his teammate Austin Dillon sometimes have good runs at Darlington, and perhaps a shorter race here versus the Southern 500 could prevent them from having the mechanical issues or whatever that sometimes plague him in the closing stages. So yeah, maybe look at Kyle.
And how
So,
about you,
so
Tyler?
what's the number you would put at Brock? What do you think?
Oh, in terms of odds,
Yes.
I mean, I wouldn't say he's the favorite, but maybe I don't know, 15-1, maybe something like that.
Okay, you nailed that one.
I,
He's not the odds-on favorite, but he is 15-1.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe like,
That's pretty
I
good.
don't
How
know.
about
I'm
you,
not the
Tyler?
best odds maker out there. Remember what end of the field I watch.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, good point. Good point. I will say that the favorite is going to be Kyle Larson after the way he ran at Homestead a couple weeks ago. And I would put his odds at probably 5-1, maybe 6-1.
You guys are just like right on the money this week, it seems. Right on or about. Kyle Larson is your odds-on favorite this weekend at plus 400 or 4-1. Last week's winner, Denny Hamlin, 5.5-1. Tyler Reddick, plus 675. Almost won this race last year. William
Oh,
Byron, who
okay.
won this race a couple of years ago at plus 950 or 9.5-1. Chase Briscoe, the winner in the fall time, along with Christopher Bell, sitting at plus 1,000 or 10 to 1. Ryan Blaney, 11 to 1. Brad Keselowski, who won this very race last year, entering with a 36 race winless streak, 12 to 1. I believe that's his highest odds outside of a super speedway style track that we have seen out of the six camp this year. Of course, Brock Nail and Kyle Busch, 15 to 1. Bubba Wallace last week, third the week before that as well at 16 to 1. Chase Elliott and Josh Berry sharing each at 18 to 1. Joey Logano, Ross Chastain at 22 to 1. And then some of your long shots include John Hunter Nemechek, 500 to 1. Ty Dillon, 1,000 to 1. Cody Ware, 1,500 to 1.
And John Hunter Nemechek's going to pay off one of these days. I talk about it on my show just about every week. I still think that Xfinity Series championship bid he did was overlooked. And, I think that he's made some interesting steps this year in the 42. The top five at Daytona and running well in the last chance qualifier at the Clash. Small steps, but important ones. So we'll find out. Not sure it'll be this week though.
I'm gonna go with the favorite. Give me Kyle Larson this week. I think, Dom, that they're gonna come in with almost the exact same setup they had at Homestead and basically try to run it back. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think that Kyle Larson comes in and gets a win here at Darlington.
Kyle Larson with the victory. All right, Brock, who's getting the win in the Goodyear 400?
When you brought up that list, Tyler Reddick really stood out to me. I'd forgotten about his battle with Chris Buescher last year, but yeah, that was a big one, and he did really well before then. He's been a little on the quieter side there, but not too far off the beaten path. Maybe this could be a time for him to turn things around and finish what he started last year. So maybe Reddick.
So Tyler's going Larson. Brock's going Reddick. I'm going with somebody who would be like, at least for the odds makers. He's never won here, but maybe he gets it done on Sunday. Alex Bowman at 40 to 1 will win the Goodyear 400.
Bowman's getting close too.
Yeah.
He is.
How can he be 40 to 1, guys? That's an undervalued pick there. I mean, we're not endorsing gambling, not gambling advice, but 40 to 1, if you're looking at the mathematical probability, I feel like he's got better than a 2.5% chance of winning on Sunday. Come on.
I think it's a good pick. I think it's a good pick. Bowman's getting very close. I think that win's coming sooner than later. Could have been Homestead a couple weeks ago. So
True.
we'll see how it all plays out here this weekend there at Darlington for Throwback Weekend. Real quick, guys, question for either one of you. Any throwback schemes you like that stand out here?
You go, Brock.
Oh man, I got to say on the Xfinity Series side, I'm so impressed with the ones that Alpha Prime Racing has put together here. First of all, getting the Ernie Irvan Kodak paint scheme for Parker Retzlaff, and what's it? We got the Jeff Gordon 2001 Richmond paint scheme for Brennan Poole, and then the Jimmy Spencer one. The Jimmy Spencer scheme in like 98, 99, I always thought had a really nice sharp look to it. That red and white car there, and seeing that on the 45, I believe Mason Massey this week, if I remember. Yeah, they're tremendous, and there's good ones across the board. It's too bad some teams aren't running throwbacks. You always get some portion of the field there, but seeing some good samples for both divisions.
I would say Tyler on my end, the two that come to mind, you brought it up and reminded me there, Brock, about Jimmy Spencer. That 41 car, I believe Cole Custer's running on Sunday, is the Jimmy
Yes.
Spencer 2002 Target paint scheme, arguably the same as the Casey Mears paint scheme that he ran for a few years as well. That one, and of course, maybe I'm just going top of the pick here, but how can you not like Kyle Larson's Terry Labonte throwback with that Kellogg's Hendrick Cars throwback? Of course, they don't have Kellogg's on the car, but they got as close as they could, even with the font and everything. I really like that paint scheme. They nailed that one. Tyler, you got to have a couple favorites, right?
Yeah, you guys took the one from me. I like the Jimmy Spencer one. That one's really good. That one comes to mind. I'm trying to think what else. I do love that William Byron's doing the Jeff Gordon Flames one. That'll be really good. I'll tell you my favorite. My favorite, and I'm not just saying this because he's my pick this weekend. Kyle Larson with that Terry Labonte scheme, that Kellogg's throwback, the HendrickCars.com, that one I just absolutely love. I think that's going to be awesome. And Dom, I will say this too. Shout out to JGR after they've been reluctant to do Throwback Weekend over the years for jumping on board and getting with the program. That's a step in the right direction. Now that we have a commissioner in this sport, you didn't mention that, Dom, in your news and notes. You're slacking a bit. We have a commissioner now. His name's Steve Phelps. Um, one of my first things, if I was commissioner, if I had Steve Phelps' job, is I would say that throwback weekend, it's mandated. Everybody has to do it, and we're picking an era, and everybody has to do a throwback theme of that era. One year be 70s, one year be 80s, one year be 90s, 2010s, and just rotate them. I think that would be the proper, more exciting way to do a throwback weekend. Everybody on the same page. You'll pick an era of that type of car.
I
That's a
like it.
good idea. They've tried to not enforce it, but encourage it. But maybe actually it needs to be not a gentle nudge and actually strong-armed kind of forcing here to get everybody involved. Who is not involved, by the way? Who comes to mind on the teams not participating this weekend?
Is
I mean,
2311
Penske,
participating?
yeah, I don't are they? I thought there's like they're doing some McDonald's scheme on one of them, but I don't think it's like a Jimmy Spencer or Hut Strickland kind of thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Kyle Busch
Um,
doing a paint scheme? I can't remember seeing something with the 8 team or the 3
well,
team.
let's circle
Oh,
back on.
Spire isn't. I know none of them are doing it. That
Oh,
was too
cool.
bad.
Let's circle back on this next week, and we'll call out all the people that didn't do.
That
I
sounds
mean,
good.
that sounds like a plan.
There we go.
All right, moving on. Let's get to our news and notes, or get to our mailbag segment, rather, where you guys can submit questions to us each and every week. Email davidstarpodcast@gmail.com, on Facebook and X at Star Podcasts. You can submit questions to us each and every week. Eddie writes in, Brock, you work on some cool big projects and documentaries. What are some books/videos you're currently working on?
Oh, good question. Actually, one thing I'm working on right now, I'm not really working on another book at the moment, kind of focusing more on the video side of it. Next video I got coming out here, if you forgive the plug here, it'll be a video on the history of Cartoon Network Wacky Racing, which is a period from 1996 through 2000, and the three different teams that they sponsored in that time period. And I was able to get some interviews together with a couple of the drivers, as well as graphic designers, and even fans of the team from back then involved in that project. And it's taken quite a while to produce. It's gonna be a three-parter. I think about 4 hours at least in total when it's finished there. But pretty much, I recorded the audio for it the day after the Daytona 500. I've been pretty much singularly working on that since then. And then after doing trackside coverage in April, we're going to be focusing again on Rise of the Field fillers in 500 days, but getting a lot of questions about those. I can assure you that both of those are still continuing. So I've been working on those as well.
Man, every minute's accounted for you, Brock. I love it.
Oh, thank you.
Nice. Dom's working on some stuff, but I don't know if he's ready to announce yet. But there's some good stuff in the works. We'll put it that way.
I'm happy to say, I'll say this. I will say this. I'm happy to announce there is a second book in the works. I can't really say too much right now. There's still a lot being figured out, but yeah, you know me, I can't sit on the sidelines too long. I got to be working on something. I got to get my hands dirty in something. I got to be working and continuing to work on big projects like Brock. So we'll announce more of that hopefully later on this year. But yeah, that's got to be exciting. You got to be working on some cool stuff too, Tyler. You're always staying busy yourself.
Not book writing. I can tell you that much. But I will be headed to San Antonio this weekend, cover the Final Four. I'm doing pregame and postgame hosting for TuneIn Radio for their college basketball coast to coast channel. So doing that and got some other stuff. I'll be working with Peacock in May and July for their Puma Pro 16 league. Doing play-by-play for that. So not writing books, but certainly staying busy. That's for certain. Another
Oh, very
question in the
exciting.
inbox. This one comes from Kyle. Kyle wants to know, with this being throwback weekend, guys, what are some of your favorite all-time paint schemes? Brock, let's start with you.
So all time, not just throwback scheme.
Yeah, just all
Yeah.
time.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, the first one that always comes to my mind is Jerry Nadeau's Michael Holligan paint scheme back in the year 2000. This blue and white. I've always been a big fan of schemes that use white really nice on the color scheme, which always it sounds kind of strange, but when it's used properly, it just looks gorgeous. That one had this very distinctive dark blue to light blue to white transition on with a checkered flag pattern, had these bright orange accents on it. They kind of perfected it throughout the year. By the time he won the race in Atlanta, they had the exact right scheme. And of course, the sponsorship ended at that point and they stopped running it. but that one always stands out in my mind. Buckshot Jones did a great scheme in 2001, similar thing, blue and white, kind of an off center, like triangular angle on the front of the car. I think they did a throwback to that just recently. I believe it was Alpha Prime that was at least considering it. But that one stands out. And the I know I'm just not just giving you one, but the one that always stands out, probably my happiest memory paint scheme wise, is going to Sears Point in 1999 and coming off of turn 7. You had Ricky Rudd in the Tide Peroxide scheme, orange and white like swirls on the side of it with the dark blue numbers and the big Tide logo. And then right behind it, one of the Cartoon Network paint schemes, the Jetsons paint scheme that Jerry Nadeau had, bright yellow with blue numbers and the graphics on that. Probably two of my favorite paint schemes, and they happen to debut at my home track. Cherished memory.
That's cool. That's cool. What about you, Dom?
I'll show you guys my favorite. I think, well, people that watch this show have seen this one before, but the car that started all for me, that Jeff Bodine #7 Phillips Ford Taurus. And when you were describing yours there, Brock, with the blue to the light blue to the white, this car captures all of that. And that's the car I raced NASCAR 99 as a 5, 6-year-old kid on the PlayStation, and just always had a good time picking the #7 Phillips Ford. And I remember telling that to Jeff and showing him that, and he's like, man, that paint scheme he had said could have had a little more potential with maybe changing some of the rim color a little bit to make it pop even more. But nonetheless, I have great memories of that paint scheme as a kid, and that one's just got to be the #1 for me. How about you, Tyler?
I love some of the classics. The Jeff Gordon Flame scheme is my personal favorite. I love the Dale Earnhardt Black #3, the Petty Classic Blue. The Davey Allison Havoline car. Those are the ones that come off the top of my head. Brock mentioned using white properly, and I think about two that fit that concept, Brock. Um, the first iteration of the Tony Stewart 20 car,
Yes.
Home Depot in rigid. That looked awesome with the way they incorporated the white in there. And then he went just to the solid orange after that. But that first iteration was an outstanding look. And along those lines, Brock, I would add around that same era, when Dale Jr. won the '04 Daytona 500, when they ran, I always liked the red Budweiser scheme, but when they did the red and the white together on that Daytona 500 car, that was a beautiful car. And I saw that car again recently. It was on display at Talladega a couple years ago and seen it in person with my own eyes. Like, wow, what a great paint scheme. Those are some of my favorites.
Good choice.
Those are all good. And I think you guys both, and maybe I've mentioned this on the show before too, but Aaron Ferrier, who's designed paint schemes for Sterling Marlin, who's worked on some of this stuff, has an eye for it. He told me something years ago, I just can't get out of my head. He says, you can have a great paint scheme. You can have all these little fine little details, but you want something that's identifiable from far away. You want the fat lines, obvious solid colors where one color ends and the next one begins. And he's right. I think those make the best paint schemes. And you can clearly see if maybe there's, in my opinion, 2 or 3 or 4 colors, maybe at most, but those thick, fat lines where you see where the car ends, it's not necessarily these fine little tiny pencil thin details that no one can see if you're 20 feet or 30 feet away or hundreds of feet away. You want something identifiable from a distance.
Yeah.
Good way to put it.
Very good. Very good. Before we get out of here, guys, let's start with Brock. Brock, what's going on with you? What do the next few days look like, man?
So, very exciting time right now. I haven't done any trackside coverage yet this year, and I've been chomping at the bit to do that. And so, next, well, actually, not now this month, in another couple of weeks, going to be driving back east. My brother and myself are going to be heading back east to cover the Rockingham race weekend, see the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series there back in action, and then on the way back, hitting Talladega on the way back there for that action. Never been to either track before. Hoping to make a trip up to Sanford that same weekend and see JD McDuffie's mural over there. I haven't seen it since, I haven't been up there since 2018, 2017, thereabouts. Looking to meet some people out there and yeah, have a great time.
Very nice. What about you, Dom?
It'll be a home weekend for sure, but be back on the road here in the next few weeks. And the next race will be Texas Motor Speedway. But looking forward to seeing Darlington on TV. It's a fun track if you guys ever get the chance to go in person. Been once, went for 2018 Throwback Weekend, and it's an amazing facility. And they do a lot of the NASCAR alumni stuff there, and the throwback stuff now. So it's going to be really cool to follow all that along this weekend. But yeah, it'll be a home weekend. I know it's an away weekend for you, Tyler. It sounds like you're going to have a lot of fun, and I look forward to seeing what you're going to be posting on social media living through you.
Yeah. Headed to San Antonio Thursday night for the Final Four. This will be my third straight Final Four that I've gotten to work for TuneIn. This has been my fourth total, and it's coming full circle. I'm going back to the first Final Four I covered was in college in 2018 in San Antonio, and I have not been back to that city, even though I live in Texas, since that trip in 2018. So full circle. Certainly excited about that, and should be a lot of fun. And you can follow me at Tyler Jones Live for more coverage. If you're a college basketball fan, check me out. X, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. Guys, a lot of fun today. Brock, plug away. Where can people find you and follow all the stuff you're doing, man?
All right, absolutely. Best place to find me, my Twitter feed at Last Car on Brock. A website, lastcar.info, is the best hub for that. Just rebuilt that website a couple of years ago. So it's got links to my YouTube work as well as my books, including my latest, Cope, my biography of Derek Cope. It came out a couple of years ago. And also my book, JD, on JD McDuffie's career, is in its second edition here. Both of those are available on Amazon. Again, my next YouTube video is going to be on the history of Cartoon Network Wacky Racing. Hoping to get that out actually right before we head out to Rockingham, if not the week of. And yeah, again, more content coming. 500 Days, Rise of the Field Fillers, everything that you're looking for. Check out lastcar.info, and that's the best place to find all of that.
Love it. All right, we'll put the checkered flag out in this edition of Let's Go Racing. We'll be rooting on David this week, and hopefully we see some good action at Darlington for sure. Make sure to subscribe to the show. New episodes out each and every week. Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. Also on YouTube as well. Hit the like button, and we certainly would appreciate it. You can also follow us on social media at Star Podcasts on X and Facebook, and you can email us, davidstarpodcast@gmail.com. This show, part of the Studio Soapbox Network. Check out Let's Go Racing, in addition to the Jones Report, Coach Bono's podcast, and all podcast platforms. For Dominic Aragon and Brock Beard, I'm Tyler Jones saying so long. It's been another edition of Let's Go Racing. We'll see you next week.